Hi, it's Mike Breininger. Calling this series A Bit of Light, back with you for the second week. I'm mostly addressing issues of what I think the Lord is doing in these days and how that's going to impact what's going on in our country, in our communities, in our homes. Today, I want to talk about what I'm calling the old house. That's the way that the church has structured itself in the past. And before you tune out on that, let me just start this by framing the picture of the abortion issue. For the last 49 years, abortion has been legal because of a Supreme Court ruling, not because the federal government passed laws or state governments passed laws making it legal, but the federal government. Most of the conservative, evangelical, biblical-based, truth-based church has been opposed to that for the last 49 years. Demonstrations, sometimes sit-ins, lots of sermons given on this. However, a part of the church, what we might call the main line or the liberal church, has actually been in favor of abortion and what they call abortion rights, which I don't even know how you can have a right to kill somebody mercilessly. But anyway, that's abortion rights. So there hasn't even been an agreement in the church about the issue of life itself, a right to life, the sanctity of life, or the protection of life. Now, it's amazing to me the church couldn't come to agreement on this. But let's just say that we'll only deal with the biblically based church. And for the most part, that part of the church was saying there is a need to protect human life at every level. But for 49 years, our voice wasn't very heard in the country. Abortions continued on. 63 million, that's an estimate, people, human beings, little babies, were killed during that time. Many in the church spoke out against it, demonstrated, challenged politicians, did whatever. None of that seemed to have a significant difference. The murdering continued to go on. This is kind of a demonstration of how weak and ineffective the church has become. Now, I don't like to be negative about the church, but I'm just going to frame this as the old house church right now because we have lost our voice in the culture in which we live, in the nation in which we live. And I'm very concerned that the loss of that voice means that truth has suffered. In other words, it's created a vacuum for people to come in with ideas that are anti-biblical, oftentimes anti-God, even anti-human. Why did this happen? Well, I think it's happened because the church itself has not risen to the occasion of the day. We have not been in a place to challenge falsehoods or anti-life behaviors. In other words, we have intellectual arguments. We can say, well, God says this, it's in the Bible, we believe it. But there really hasn't been the ability to bring that home in any realm except the church itself. And some would even question whether it's in the church because a lot of the churches failed to make this much of an issue. In fact, many pastors wouldn't even speak about issues like abortion. And there are many other issues. Of course, people are so confused right now in their lives. The youth suicide rate is crazy. There's this idea about what gender, or confusion over that. There is so much confusion because truth has been abandoned. So the church has tried to promote truth, and lost the battle. Nobody's listening to us anymore. So if we think of that as a culture war, I'm afraid I have to declare that we've lost the culture war. And it's not just one issue, it's issue after issue on this. And I don't know if anyone outside the church is listening to the church anymore. And that tells us there's a serious problem because the church is supposed to be not only the demonstration of the manifold wisdom of God on the earth, Ephesians 3:10. We are also supposed to have the power of God demonstrated in the church. And that is what is lacking and why our voice is meaningless today. We have gone to the intellectual gospel without the power of the gospel. What do I mean by the power of the gospel? Well, in the early church, the gospel was proclaimed clearly, proclamation of the gospel, and a demonstration of the gospel. Signs, wonders, and miracles. People were healed, blind could see, ears were opened, the dead were raised. The people understood that the power of God was present with the church. And so the church had a profound and powerful voice, even though it was small. Eventually, if you know the history, the story of the church is that even the gigantic, powerful Roman Empire bowed to the church because it was truth filled with power. It says in Acts that as the believers met together in Solomon's colonnade, it was like a little porch structure over the temple, that the power of God was there with them. And people who didn't know Jesus were afraid to come there because the power of God was so incredible at that time. I'm saying that I'm giving you a little indication of what I'm going to talk about a few weeks down the road, but that's the dynamic that when the power of God is there, there's a fear of God or an understanding that we shouldn't cross the lines of what God has declared to be right or truth. Those lines have been crossed over and over again so that most people don't even know there is such a thing as lines anymore. I don't want to speak into the air. I don't want to be part of the church that simply speaks into the air. So what do we think? God has left us in this situation that we're just going to continue to be powerless and have decreasing amounts of influence until there's nothing left of the church? Well, it would appear that way, but that's not the way things are going to go. I'm here to tell you that God has a plan for this, and he plans to raise up something more powerful and more glorious than we have ever seen before. What I was shown by the Lord was this. The church of today is mostly built with a combination of stones and bricks. Let me explain that for you. The New Testament talks about living stones, people that serve God. They're called living stones, and the Holy Spirit is in them and works through them to minister to other people, to bring truth, but also the power of God to other people. Those are living stones. Bricks are things that are made by men. In other words, we have the ability to create programs, to attract people by glitz and glamour into the church, to make ourselves more attractive to people who don't really know Jesus. But as time has gone on, the bending toward attracting people, toward being sensitive to those who are not yet part of the people of God has become programmatic and empty of the power of God. Those are the bricks that have been put into the structure of the church. So we've got stones, living stones, and we got bricks, and it has weakened the church so much that I believe the intent of the Lord today is to get rid of the bricks, okay? All the things that came out of the thinking of the mind of men, all the programs, all the efforts that have tried to make the church attractive rather than powerful. I think those things need to be taken out. I think this is from the Lord, that those things need to be taken out. And we need to see the power of God restored to the church. That's what I'm contending for. And I believe that that is going to be the watershed that will give the church a voice again, not just in the political realm, because we're not looking to take over politics. We're looking to speak truth into it. But in the hearts and minds of people who are looking for what's the meaning of life? What purpose do I have? What direction do I have? Who am I? How was I made? And what was I made for? Those are questions that God has the answer to. But instead, we're letting the social experimenters answer those questions. Or if they don't answer them, they're just saying, go out and do whatever you want to do until you find what you're looking for, or you are destroyed. And for most people, that path ends in destruction, not in discovery. We need the power of God once again. I believe this is a day where the Lord is revealing the old house to be ineffective and incapable of answering the challenges of the day in which we live. And so there is a new house that will be raised up. I'll be talking about that in the future. But right now, I want to finish off with this. In regard to the abortion issue, that is not over by any means. The overturning of Roe v. Wade was just the step in removing that dark cloud nationally, so that we now have the ability to deal with it on a state level from a political realm, but in a much more significant way, we're dealing with hearts and minds to give people an understanding that God has made each of those little tiny human beings uniquely in his image and likeness from the moment of conception on. I think as we see the value of humans and the way God has created us, we'll be able to see that God has a perfect purpose and plan for every person. And that when we're filled with the truth of God, that's knowledge, when we're filled with the character of Christ and we're filled with the power of God, everything is set right in our lives and eventually will be set right in our culture. Thank you for joining me. I'll be back again next week. God bless you.